Welcome to the Barbecue Stories channel. Imagine if Jim and Linda had arrived just 30 minutes sooner or later, chances are everything would have played out differently. Now, what if Mark were actually a notorious seducer of other men's wives? And what if one of his previous victims decided to confront him about it? As I observed from about 3 meters away, I watched the predator in action. He was scanning the room, pretending to socialize, a mere facade for his true intentions. I tracked his gaze as he sized up the room, gradually narrowing his search down to 3 spots, then 2. He meticulously assessed his targets, and I knew he was damn certain of who the weakest was. The police officer had warned me about it, saying that somehow he just instinctively knows his prey. So intent on his scanning, he barely noticed my presence. He wasn't hasty in making his choice, and I inched closer, already suspecting where this was headed. He paused, assessed the situation, and then made his choice. The look on his face changed from evaluative to friendly. It was clear that I was watching the sharpest alpha wolf in the area, and he had chosen his prey. He began moving toward a table where a pretty blue-eyed blonde sat, probably in her early 30s, dressed in a blue outfit, next to a man around her age who looked like a happily married guy, though likely not for long. I intercepted him before he could reach the table and gave him a smile, saying, "Hey, remember me?" Caught off guard, his focus had been so fixed on his target that he hadn't noticed my approach. He looked at me, blinked, and replied, "Wait, what?" "No, I'm busy. I only sign autographs at official events." I shook my head, smiling sadly. "Guess I'm just another statistic in your book, huh? You seduced my wife 8 months ago. We were right here. You asked her to dance, and despite my protests, she agreed. You danced, then invited her over, and on my anniversary no less, you slept with her." Heads turned, and suddenly, the whole restaurant's attention was on us. Everyone was glued to the unfolding drama. The woman in the blue dress, oblivious to the night's earlier events, had no idea that my timely interruption had saved her from betraying her husband in the worst possible way. "Well, sorry. It won't happen again," he sneered. I shook my head again. "For you, it's all a numbers game, isn't it? You make a sport out of picking up married women right under their husbands' noses, and it works. Rumor has it that during the off-season, you manage 2 or 3 women a week, and even during the season, at least 1 each week. Quite the tally." He smirked, his smile oozing with self-satisfaction. "Narcissism plus a bit of sheer ruthlessness, you're one of the worst out there," I responded with a smirk of my own. 5 years now, let's ballpark it at 100 women a year. 5 years since you joined the team, and that's 500 marriages ruined." I shook my head yet again. Maybe half of them patched things up, but let's face it, the damage was done. It's never really the same. How many kids cried themselves to sleep because of what you did? My own kids cried. His face showed nothing but a slight discomfort, maybe embarrassment, though I had a hunch he was already scheming about how to tweak his approach next time. A hotel staff member approached to quiet things down, so I set my watch timer for 4 minutes and 30 seconds, the exact time I'd calculated it would take for police to arrive after a 911 call. Every minute, the timer would beep, counting down to 0. I drew my Glock, pointing it at Mark's head. The staffer backed off immediately. The husband of the blue-dressed woman rose, shielding his wife. I shook my head. He was willing to take a bullet for her, yet if I hadn't stepped in, she would have betrayed him tonight. Not that any of them realized it, and I had no plans to enlighten them. Mark appeared nervous yet oddly confident, wearing an expression that suggested he'd been in situations like this before. "My kids cried their damn eyes out when we got divorced," I said, and I noticed at least 4 people recording the scene on their phones. One tried to hide his phone when he saw me looking, but I encouraged him, "Go ahead, record it." Here's the quick rundown. Mark preys on married women right in front of their husbands. It's his game. My watch beeped for minutes as I recounted the events to her. After dancing with Mark, she came back, and when I started telling her how wrong her actions were, she deliberately spilled wine on herself. claimed she needed to clean up for a few minutes, which turned into 20. When I started asking around, an employee informed me that my wife had left with him. The police arrived and took me away to cool off for 2 hours. The shock was palpable among the surrounding patrons, and Mark looked more frustrated than anyone else, perhaps even re-evaluating his future conquests. The crowd of onlookers with their phones outgrew from 4 to about 20, and many, including the blue-dressed woman, looked stunned. Looking straight at Mark, I commanded, "Take off your pants." Mark's expression was frozen. Waving the gun, I repeated, "Take off your pants, you scumbag." "Why?" he demanded. "Well," I replied sarcastically, "since I sprouted these horns, I've become a raging homosexual, and I just can't wait to check out your size. Now, hurry up and take off your pants." He hesitated, but then lowered his suit trousers, and I added, "Underwear too." Now exposed for everyone to see, I gave him a hard look and shook my head. Alpha wolf indeed. Sitting in the police car later, I was watching the clock, imagining the hurt. I paused before going on. "Actually, no, you can't imagine it. You only care about yourself." Glancing at one of the onlookers with his phone, I imagined being aware that Mark's house was 50 minutes away and realizing that I'd been in that police car for 50 minutes, picturing it all. I couldn't shut off that mental image. She'd be naked, with him taking what was meant for me. The pain hit like a tidal wave, fiery and unrelenting. My watch beeped at 3 minutes, and in a low voice, I muttered, "He's taking what was promised only to me." And then I spent 2 hours handcuffed at the station, knowing full well what was happening. The officer at the station tried to console me, claiming it was a primal instinct, that most women, when surveyed anonymously, would do the same if an alpha approached, even in front of their husbands. He told me that women feel a primal urge to mate with the strongest, and Mark, well, he was that ultimate alpha. I didn't say a word in response, simply bottled up the rage. I'd saved a marriage tonight, yet they had no idea what could have happened. In a softer voice, I went on. She came home babbling excuses, trying to rationalize it. It was just sex, she'd said. Of course, our marriage crumbled. She even offered to even the score, saying I could hire a supermodel, any kind of sex I wanted. But I told her I was a one-woman man and always would be, so long as she felt the same. I loved what we had, the connection, the way she looked at me. I cherished seeing her smile up at me, her voice trembling, saying she loved me. And Mark, he tore all of that apart. I glanced around the room at those recording and asked, could you honestly stay in a marriage after that? Imagine looking down at her a year later, while you're together, knowing she's thinking about someone else. Turning my gaze to the man with the phone, I added, for any woman listening, if you cheat on your husband, your marriage is over. A police officer might argue that sleeping with an alpha is primal, but men have a primal need for loyalty from their wives. Sure, some might stick around for the kids, but it's never going to be the same marriage. My watch beeped 2 minutes as I thought about my kids, and another surge of pain washed over me. I crushed it, refusing to be defeated by failure. I looked at the same man filming and said, you've no idea what it's like to look into your kids' tear-streaked faces when you tell them you're getting divorced. After our split, I started drinking, lost my job, and now I'm on the edge of eviction. I lost everything. She was my first and only. We had our twins young, maybe too young. She was only 18 when we got married, but every day, I loved her more, until that night. I turned to Mark, voice low and filled with barely restrained fury, and you destroyed all that. I clicked the safety off my gun, making sure he saw, and he looked genuinely worried for the first time. You're not really going to kill me, you? Mark asked. I replied, maybe this won't kill you, but I changed my aim, shooting 3 times at his pride, deliberately avoiding his abdomen. He crumpled to the floor, and while the women screamed, Mark screamed even louder. I adjusted my aim, firing for more shots, targeting his pride and its accomplice, then twice more at his ankle. His pride and its accomplice were practically shredded. The woman in the blue dress found her husband shielding her once more. How ironic, she looked at him as if he were a superhero. Even more ironic, my watch beeped, 1 minute left. I turned to her husband and asked, "What's your name?" He tensed up, but with the gun in my hand, he answered, "Jim." "And your wife?" I continued. "Linda," he replied. "Do you have kids?" I asked. "2," he said. "Why?" "Just curious," I answered, placing the gun on the table. "Don't touch it. The cops will be here any second, and it's better if you're nowhere near the weapon when they burst through the door. I suggest everyone put their hands on the table. Cops get nervous when they walk into an armed situation. Oh, and if there's a doctor here, you can help him. This is only between us." As my watch beeped again, the cops burst in 10 seconds later. They seemed confused when they didn't see anyone holding a weapon, but they continued shouting instructions. Standing there with my hands up, I called out, "I'm the one you're looking for." During the trial, the defense attempted to argue for temporary insanity on my behalf, but the prosecutor wasn't having it. I couldn't blame him. I ended up with a plea deal of 5 to 8 years instead of the potential 30. I wondered why they agreed to the deal. Perhaps they feared the temporary insanity defense might actually work. I served 5 years and 11 months. Mark attended every parole hearing starting from my 3rd year inside, entering with a cane, radiating hatred. I insisted I wasn't a danger to anyone except Mark, but I lost that battle, returning to my cell for another year. The victim's opinion is heard and considered, which is generally a good rule in 99.9% of cases, except for Mark. After 5 years, Mark didn't show up for the first time at my hearing. I assumed he'd finally grown tired of me. I was granted parole and released just a week shy of 6 years from the day I shot him. I remember when I first entered prison, it wasn't great, but it wasn't as terrible as I had imagined. I received a few nods, followed the general rules, and made sure not to upset anyone. After I got out, I recalled the names of that couple, Jim and Linda Blazer. On the anniversary of the day I shot Mark, I drove to their house in a friend's car. According to the internet, they were still married. They emerged from the house, Linda wearing that same blue dress. As she approached the car, Jim opened the door for her, and she grabbed him, kissing him passionately. That moment was a huge trigger for me. It had happened less frequently over the years, but that same burning pain returned. I once had such a beautiful love with my wife. I smiled, realizing it was worth it. I had saved one marriage. They still shared that same innocent, pure love. 1 in 10 marriages has that connection, and I saved at least one. How many more would there have been if Mark had stayed on the team for another 5 years? Probably hundreds. Mark was in his prime and magnificent. How many more women fell for him after he left sports? I'll never know the true number, but I know I saved at least one marriage. The parole board always wanted me to express remorse. I told them I did, but I lied. I couldn't feel it. I understood he could have been hit by a bus the next day, but statistically, I saved hundreds of marriages. I had been in a halfway house for ex-prisoners for only 3 days when I received a call on my government-issued cell phone. "Hello, John Butler," a male voice said. "Yes?" I replied. "This is Tony Kurz. I own a transportation company and am ready to hire you, even offering to train you as a truck driver. Beggars can't be choosers, as they say." I was in Tony's office with another guy sitting next to him and an empty chair as well. He asked me one question: "Are you planning to shoot anyone else?" "No," I replied. Tony nodded. "I saw the news. The videos of you shooting Mark went viral. The police chief lost his job because of it. They sacrificed him. He was protecting Mark, arresting enraged husbands and holding them for hours. It was all over email newsletters. Everyone in City Hall defended the football star, but they pinned it all on him." Tony paused, then said, "That doesn't matter to me. Your training starts Monday. You won't be rich, but you'll be able to afford a decent life." Joe, who sat beside him, chimed in, "I've got a used car dealership. There's a 14-year-old Civic with 40,000 miles on it. A sweet old lady used to drive it to church on Sundays. It looks rough because she scraped it on the gate, but it's a Honda with only 40,000 miles. A basic ride, and I'll sell it to you for $100. I smiled and shook my head. Sorry, I don't have $100. I'm in a halfway house. Tony slid a $100 bill over to me, and I handed it to Joe. I've got an apartment for rent that I just can't seem to lease out. I'll rent it to you for $400 a month for this year. It sounded too good to be true, and I said it was worth more than that. Joe replied, then you won't complain when I raise the rent next year. Just say yes, you fool. I nodded. Yes. I asked, why? This is too good to be true. Tony said, we have something in common, us four. Huh? Who's the fourth guy? I asked. I only see three. He's running late, Tony said, looking at Joe. Joe's been my best friend since elementary school. We've done well. I own a transportation company, and he owns a car lot and a few apartment buildings. We're not basement dwellers, but our wives truly loved Mark. We all went through the same thing you did. Joe added, our wives met Mark on the same night about 4 years before yours did. Imagine your situation, but on top of that, they were all having sex together. I winced. Tony said, let go of the hate. We both remarried because we enjoy being married. By the way, my second wife is younger, not as beautiful as the first, but faithful, and she absolutely loves having sex. You can start over, we're giving you a chance at a new life. You're 32, let go of the hate or it will consume you. Mark is dead, and your ex-wife has become a laughingstock to her neighbors. Embrace the life we're offering you. I smiled and said, wait, I shouldn't be happy when someone dies? But I made an exception for Mark, Joe smirked. I smiled too. You're not supposed to be happy when someone dies, but I can't help it. Mark took his own life 6 months ago. The higher you climb, the harder the fall. He went from being a professional football player who could get any girl to a man without his instrument and a leg that didn't work. No career, no girls. He still had plenty of money but wanted more. I asked, how did my ex-wife become a laughingstock? Legally, I'm not allowed to contact your ex-wife or kids, Tony replied. I found some things out, knowing you wouldn't be allowed to contact her. She got remarried about 4 years ago. Your kids are fine, both are doing well in school. I didn't do anything illegal, just checked public records and looked through their school's website. I asked, so why is my ex-wife a laughingstock? Tony laughed and typed a few words on his laptop, turning it around. It was a Google search result for Mark Lavalier's sex tape. There were thousands of views. Tony said, looks like Mark slept with the wife of someone who either had access to his property or knew a hacker. I don't really care either way, they knew someone who could spread videos online. Joe said he had cameras all over his bedroom. There was a studio in the basement, with a guy operating the cameras hidden in the light fixtures and walls. He had 3 angles on his bed and another camera in the shower. Somehow, all his videos were uploaded to 50 different websites simultaneously. Tony clicked on the first result, and I closely examined the browser. It said, join now for access to all 591 videos of wives with Mark Lavalier from all 3 angles. Bonus shower footage. Joe looked at me and reiterated, let go of the hate. We've been waiting a long time to help you. You've got friends here. We were all betrayed by our wives for him, and now he's dead. The weight lifted off my shoulders as I nodded. I almost started crying from the relief. A minute later, I asked, so who's the other chair for? I heard the door open and then a voice say, sorry I'm late. I had a court hearing and will have to head back soon, can't sit and chat. I turned around to see my prosecutor smiling at me as he left. Thank you for listening until the end. See you in the next episode of Cheating Secrets. Take care of yourself and your loved ones. Goodbye.